It began, as it so often did, in a room without windows, a space bathed in the cold green glow of cathode ray tubes, where the silence was so profound it felt like a physical presence. On the screen, a faint, ethereal sweep of light moved with the silent, relentless patience of a predator. For the young Air Force operator staring at that screen, the world had shrunk to this single point of light, this ghost in the machine. In the late 20th century, this was the front line. Not a muddy trench or a fortified bunker, but an air-conditioned room, 1,000 miles from any potential enemy. His job was not to pull a trigger, but to interpret shadows, to decide if a flicker of phosphorescence was a flock of geese, a weather anomaly, or the beginning of the end of the world. This was the quiet terror of the Cold War, a conflict waged not in grand battles, but in the heartbeats between a blip appearing on a radar screen and a voice on a secure line confirming its nature. For 40 years, humanity had lived under a nuclear sword of Damocles, held by the thinnest of threads. The strategy was a paradox of horrifying logic, mutually assured destruction. The only way to prevent annihilation was to guarantee it for everyone. Cities were not just places where people lived, they were targets pre-programmed into the guidance systems of intercontinental ballistic missiles. Children learned to duck and cover under their school desks, a futile ritual against a power that could turn a city to glass. It was a peace maintained by the promise of ultimate violence, a standoff between two superpowers who had built arsenals capable of destroying civilization many times over. To understand how a $70 million missile could be defeated by a single Typo, you must first understand the world that built it. It was a world obsessed with speed, with distance, with precision. The challenge was biblical in its scale. A missile launched from a silo in Siberia could cross the North Pole and reach a city in the American Midwest in less than 30 minutes. 30 minutes. The time it takes to watch a sitcom, to cook a simple meal, to read a bedtime story. In that sliver of time, a decision of unimaginable weight would have to be made. Was the threat real? Was it a full-scale attack? Was it a mistake? There was no time for deliberation, no room for error. The response had to be instant, automated, and absolute. This created an arms race not just of warheads, but of information. The most powerful weapon was not the bomb itself, but the ability to see it coming. Vast networks of radar stations were built, from the frozen tundra of the Arctic to remote islands in the Pacific. Satellites were launched into the heavens, their unblinking eyes staring down, searching for the telltale infrared bloom of a rocket engine igniting. It was a digital web spun around the globe, designed to provide a few precious minutes of warning. And in response to that warning, an opposing system of missiles housed in hardened silos waited for the command to launch, to unleash their own terrible fire upon the enemy. It was a planetary hair trigger, a system of such complexity and speed that human beings were becoming the slowest, most unreliable parts of the equation. But then, as the 1980s gave way to the 1990s, the world began to change. The Berlin Wall, that stark symbol of division, crumbled into souvenir-sized pieces. The Soviet Union, the monolithic adversary that had defined American foreign policy for 2 generations, was beginning to fracture. The great superpower standoff, the central drama of the post-war era, was coming to an end. A collective sigh of relief was breathed around the world. The specter of global thermonuclear war seemed to be receding. Yet, the weapons remained. The technologies of destruction, forged in the crucible of the Cold War, were now ready to be deployed in a new kind of conflict. On August 2, 1990, the world's attention shifted from the plains of Europe to the deserts of the Middle East. Iraq, under the command of Saddam Hussein, invaded its small oil-rich neighbor Kuwait. This was not a clash of superpowers, but it was a clear and brazen act of aggression that threatened the stability of a vital region. The United States, leading a massive international coalition, responded with Operation Desert Shield, and later Desert Storm. The war that unfolded was in many ways the war the Cold War had always prepared for, but on a smaller regional scale. It was a showcase of advanced military technology. Stealth bombers, invisible to radar, struck targets with impunity. Cruise missiles guided by satellites flew hundreds of miles to hit buildings with pinpoint accuracy. This was a new era of warfare, broadcast live into the living rooms of the world. And at the heart of this technological spectacle was a new kind of threat and a new kind of shield. The threat was the Scud. A Soviet-designed liquid-fueled ballistic missile, the Scud was a relic of an earlier age. It was notoriously inaccurate, a clunky and imprecise weapon. In a conventional military sense, it was almost useless. You couldn't use it to reliably hit an enemy airbase or a command bunker. But Saddam Hussein wasn't using it as a conventional military weapon. He was using it as a weapon of terror. He launched them not at armies, but at cities, at Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, and at Tel Aviv and Haifa in Israel. The goal was not to defeat an army, but to break the will of a people, and more strategically, to provoke Israel into retaliating, an act that could shatter the fragile Arab coalition aligned against Iraq. For civilians on the ground, the experience was terrifying. The wail of an air raid siren would pierce the night. Families would scramble into sealed rooms, donning clumsy gas masks, fearing not just the high explosive warhead, but the chemical or biological agents it might carry. The world watched, horrified, as this crude but effective weapon brought the fear of random, indiscriminate death to millions. Against this sword, the coalition deployed its shield, the MM-104 Patriot missile system. The Patriot was everything the Scud was not. It was the pinnacle of American defensive technology, a system designed to do the impossible, to hit a bullet with another bullet. In development for decades, it was a marvel of engineering, a complex system of phased array radar, command and control stations, and sleek, lightning-fast interceptor missiles. The radar would detect an incoming Scud, tracking its trajectory at thousands of miles per hour. The system's computers would then calculate an interception point, a precise spot in the sky where the two objects would meet. With a roar of fire and smoke, a Patriot missile would launch, accelerating to over 5 times the speed of sound, guided by a stream of data from the ground, on a collision course with its target. In the early days of the war, the Patriot was hailed as an unmitigated triumph. Night after night, news anchors would show grainy, green-tinged footage of a streak of light rising into the sky to meet another, resulting in a silent flash, a starburst of light that signified a successful intercept. Generals gave triumphant press conferences, claiming near-perfect success rates. The Patriot became a symbol of American technological prowess, a guardian angel of the skies protecting innocent civilians from a madman's terror weapon. It was proof that technology could be a savior, a solution to the very terrors that other technology had created. The system was performing exactly as it was designed to, a seamless fusion of hardware and software, of radar waves and rocket fuel, all working in perfect harmony. But deep within the system, hidden in the millions of lines of computer code that formed its digital brain, a tiny, almost infinitesimal error was waiting. A flaw not in the engineering, not in the rocketry, but in the arithmetic. It was a single, simple rounding error, a microscopic imprecision born from a choice made by a programmer years before. And with every passing hour that the system was running, this tiny error was growing, accumulating like a single grain of sand added to a scale, moment by moment, until the balance would inevitably and catastrophically tip. To understand the failure, one must first understand the machine, not as an idea, but as a physical thing, a creature of the desert. A Patriot missile battery is not a single object, but an ecosystem of interconnected parts, a convoy of olive-drab steel and humming electronics. Its heart is the engagement control station, the ANMSQ-104, a windowless metal shelter mounted on the back of a 5-ton M818 truck. Inside, in the cool, filtered air, a crew of 3 sits bathed in the green glow of cathode ray tubes, operators watching the sky through the language of symbols and vectors. This shelter, this brain, is useless on its own. It is tethered by thick, black umbilical cables to the other organs of the system. The most prominent of these is the eye, the AN-MPQ-53 phased array radar. It doesn't spin like a conventional radar dish. It stares. A flat octagonal plate, tilted back at a permanent 68-degree angle. its face a complex grid of 5,161 individual phase-shifting elements. It is a massive power consumer, a voracious beast that paints a cone of the sky with microwave energy, pulsing dozens of times per second. To feed this hunger, the battery requires its own power station, a pair of 150 kilowatt diesel generators humming relentlessly day and night. Each generator, a 400 Hz turbine unit designated EPP3, consumes diesel fuel at a rate of nearly 15 gallons per hour. For a single battery to remain operational around the clock, it burns through more than 700 gallons of fuel every single day. That's over 2.5 tons of diesel every 24 hours. Now multiply that across all the batteries deployed in the theater. The logistics become staggering. A constant stream of M931 tractor trucks, hauling 5,000-gallon fuel tankers, becomes the circulatory system of this air defense network. An artery of flammable liquid snaking across hundreds of miles of hostile territory. Each truck a target, each gallon a testament to the immense industrial effort required to keep those radar screens lit. And then there are the teeth of the system, the M901 launching stations, each carrying 4 missile canisters. Each canister holds a single MM-104 missile, a 17-foot, 2,000-pound projectile, packed with a solid rocket motor that burns for 12 seconds, accelerating the interceptor to over 3,000 miles per hour. The launchers are semi-autonomous, receiving their commands via a radio data link or a landline from the engagement control station. They are positioned in a carefully surveyed arc, miles away from the radar, to create a wide net of lethal potential. The entire system, radar, control van, launchers, generators, communication mast, is a multi-ton beast that requires a platoon of soldiers, nearly 100 strong, to operate, maintain, and defend. These soldiers, in turn, have their own logistical tale. They run on calories. The standard MRE, the meal ready to eat of the era, provided roughly 1,200 calories per pack. In a high-stress, 24/7 operational environment, a soldier might consume 3 or 4 a day. For a single battery, that's over 300 MREs, a quarter ton of packaged food every single day, plus thousands of gallons of potable water. The entire apparatus, from the fuel tankers to the water bottles to the spare circuit boards, represented a monumental supply chain. A river of material flowing into the desert just to keep one small patch of sky under watch. It was inside the brain, the engagement control station, that the flaw resided. The computer system that ran the Patriot was a marvel for its time, designed in the 1970s. Its core was a military-grade processor, and its software was written in a specialized dialect of assembly language, the most fundamental and direct way to give a machine instructions. This is where the decisions were made. The radar would detect a target, and its raw data, azimuth, elevation, range, would be fed into the computer. The software's job was to take these snapshots in time and connect the dots, calculating the target's speed and trajectory. To do this, it needed a clock, an internal digital metronome, ticking away with perfect regularity. The system's clock measured time in tenths of a second, but the computer, like all computers, did not think in tenths. It thought in binary, ones and zeros. The programmer's task was to represent the decimal value of 1/10 or 110 in the binary language of the machine. Here, the problem began. In decimal, a number like 1/3 becomes a repeating fraction, 0.33, stretching on forever. In binary, the number 1/10 does the same thing. It becomes an infinite repeating sequence, 0.0001010111, and on and on. The computer had to store this number in a memory location called a register. Due to the hardware architecture of the time, the designers had allocated a 24-bit fixed-point register for this value. 24 bits was considered quite precise for the 1970s, but it was not infinite. A 24-bit register can only hold 24 ones and zeros. So, when the computer stored the value for 1/10, it took the infinitely repeating binary sequence and simply chopped it off after the 24th digit. The number it stored was 0.001 sub and 0.01 sub 0.01 sub and 0.01 sub 0.1 sub 1 so 0. It was incredibly close to the true value of 1/10, but it was not exact. A tiny, almost imperceptible piece of the number was lost in the truncation. The error was infinitesimal. In decimal terms, it was approximately 0.95, less than 1/10 millionth of a second. For a single calculation, this discrepancy was completely irrelevant, buried in the noise of atmospheric distortion and radar resolution. It was a perfectly acceptable engineering compromise. But the Patriot system was not designed for short sprints. It was designed as a fortress, to be turned on and left on for days, even weeks at a time, and its internal clock was not reset. Every 10th of a second, for every second the system was running, the tracking software would use this slightly inaccurate truncated number. And with every single tick of that internal clock, the tiny error was added to the total system time. It was cumulative. After 1 full second, the system's clock was off by just under 1/1,000,000th of a second. After 1 minute, it was off by about 57 millionths of a second. Still, a meaningless number. But after 1 hour of continuous operation, the system's internal clock had drifted from reality by just over 2,000ths of a second. After a full day, 24 hours, the drift was over 0.05 seconds. After 100 hours of continuous operation, a little over 4 days, the total accumulated error in the system's clock reached 0.34 seconds, a third of a second. In human terms, it is the blink of an eye. In the world of hypersonic interception, it is an eternity. An incoming Scud missile travels at roughly 1,600 meters per second, just over 5 times the speed of sound. In 0.34 seconds, a Scud travels more than 500 meters, over half a kilometer. The Patriot system's tracking software worked by creating what is known as a range gate. Based on the target's last known position and calculated velocity, it would predict where the target should be at the next instant. It would then open a small virtual box, the range gate, in that precise spot in the sky and tell the radar to look inside it. As long as the target appeared inside that box on the next radar sweep, the track was maintained. But as the Patriot's internal clock drifted further and further from true time, its prediction of where the target should be became increasingly wrong. The range gate it opened was no longer aligned with reality. The system would open its box 500 meters behind the actual location of the speeding missile. The radar would look inside the box, find nothing, and assume the target had vanished or was a false reading. The track would be dropped, and any interceptor missile already in the air, climbing on a pillar of fire towards a predicted point in space, would suddenly lose its guidance. It would become a blind, 2,000-pound projectile flying through an empty sky, its target now hundreds of meters away, continuing unmolested on its deadly arc toward the ground. The entire magnificent $2 billion system, the network of generators, the tons of fuel, the soldiers eating their packaged meals, was all rendered useless, defeated not by an enemy weapon, but by a number that didn't quite fit. A number that didn't quite fit. It lived as a ghost in the machine, a silent, invisible flaw in a river of ones and zeros. It did not announce itself. It had no sound, no weight, no form. It was simply a value stored in a register that was slightly, almost imperceptibly wrong. But this number, this mathematical ghost, would not remain in the sterile world of silicon and electricity. It was about to cross over. It was about to be given weight and sound and form. It was about to be measured in torn steel, in shattered concrete, and in the lives of men who had no idea it even existed. On the ground, in the sprawling prefabricated city of Dhahran, Saudi Arabia, the war had a different rhythm. It was not the constant terror of the front line, but a grinding routine of waiting. For the men and women of the US Army's 475th Quartermaster Group, home was a converted warehouse, a temporary shelter of sheet metal and concrete blocks designated Barracks 143. It was a place of steel-framed cots, worn-out paperbacks, and letters from home taped to metal lockers. It was a place where the air tasted of dust and diesel fuel, where the days were measured by the roar of generators and the scuff of boots on a concrete floor. Time here was not measured in microseconds. It was measured in the long, slow crawl toward the next meal, the next mail call, the next rotation home. Specialist Stephen Atherton was sitting on the edge of his cot, trying to find the right words. The thin blue airmail paper felt fragile in his hands, calloused from working on supply trucks. He wasn't writing about the war, not really. He was writing about the future. He told his wife about the savings he was putting away, about the down payment on a small house they'd talked about, the one with the big oak tree in the backyard. He asked about his daughter's first year of school, if she was still struggling with her spelling. He could almost smell the cut grass of his own lawn, an impossible scent in the middle of the desert. He was trying to build a bridge of words, a flimsy path that stretched over thousands of miles of ocean and sand, connecting his cot in a dusty warehouse to the life that was waiting for him. He was not a warrior in that moment. He was a husband and a father, folding up a piece of his heart to send home. Not far from him, Sergeant Frank Allen was holding court near the makeshift wreck area. He was an older soldier, a reservist called up from his job managing a hardware store in Pennsylvania. He was good with his hands and better with a story. He was in the middle of a long, rambling tale about a fishing trip, his voice a low rumble against the hum of the ventilation fans. A small group of younger soldiers leaned in, listening. For them, Allen was a piece of the world they'd left behind. He talked about mortgages and Little League and the right way to fix a leaky faucet. He was their connection to normal. He had a worn deck of cards in his breast pocket, and after the story, he'd promised them a game of poker. The stakes were cigarettes and candy bars from their MREs. It was a small ritual, a way of pretending they were just guys in a garage on a Saturday night and not soldiers sitting on a target. In another corner, a young private, barely 20 years old, was meticulously cleaning his rifle for the third time that day. It was a nervous habit, a task that gave his hands something to do when his mind started to wander. He didn't have a wife or kids to write to. His life back home was a part-time job at a gas station and a beat-up Toyota. The army was his chance to be part of something bigger. He felt a sense of purpose here, a sense of belonging. He worked until the smell of gun oil filled the air around him, a familiar, comforting scent. He checked the action, sighted down the barrel at an imaginary foe, and felt the solid, reassuring weight of the weapon in his hands. He was ready. He was doing his job. And high above them, in the cold, thin air of the upper atmosphere, the other half of the story was unfolding. The Scud missile, a crude but effective weapon, was on the final leg of its ballistic arc. It was a simple instrument of terror, a long tube packed with fuel and high explosives. It was falling back to Earth at 5 times the speed of sound. On the ground, the magnificent machine, the Patriot system, saw it coming. Its powerful radar locked on. Its computers began to calculate. Time of flight, velocity, intercept point. The system knew precisely what to do. It was designed for this single exquisite purpose. It prepared to launch its own missile, a $70 million Guardian, to meet the threat in the sky. But inside its electronic brain, the ghost was at work. The system's internal clock, which had been running continuously for over 100 hours, was now off by 0.34 seconds, a third of a second. To the soldiers in the barracks below, a third of a second was nothing. It was the time between heartbeats. But to the Patriot, it was a fatal flaw. Based on its faulty time, the computer calculated where the Scud should be. It opened its range gate, its narrow window of attention. In that patch of empty sky, it looked. It listened. The radar swept the coordinates. Nothing. The real Scud was already 500 meters ahead of the prediction, a phantom that the system's flawed vision could no longer see. The computer made its logical and tragically wrong conclusion. It was a false track. The target was gone. The interceptor missile that should have climbed a pillar of fire into the night sky never left its launch tube. The system, in its digital certainty, stood down. For the men in Barracks 143, there was no warning. There was only a sudden, silent flash of brilliant white light that bleached the world of all color. It was followed, an instant later, not by a sound, but by a physical blow. The air itself became a solid object, a hammer that struck the building and everything in it. The thin metal roof vaporized, the concrete walls imploded. The world of cots and lockers and card games and half-written letters ceased to exist. It was replaced by a universe of fire, shrapnel, and crushing force. The floor heaved, and the very ground seemed to turn to liquid. The sound, when it finally arrived, was the sound of the world being torn apart. It was a physical presence that shattered eardrums and broke bones. In the swirling chaos of dust and smoke, there was no up or down, no sense of time or place. There was only the roar, the heat, and the sudden, shocking silence of lives extinguished in the space between one breath and the next. Specialist Atherton's letter about the oak tree was turned to ash before it could ever be mailed. Sergeant Allen's fishing story was cut short mid-sentence, his deck of cards scattered like fallen leaves in the blast. The young private's perfectly clean rifle was twisted into a piece of scorched, unrecognizable metal. The number, the tiny error born in a line of code, had finally found its form. It was in the jagged steel that pierced the night. It was in the crater, 60 feet wide, that now gaped where a building once stood. And it was in the bodies of 28 American soldiers, killed not by the failure of their courage or the failure of their training, but by a single, rounding error in a computer's clock. A third of a second, an eternity that allowed an enemy missile to slip through the most advanced defensive shield ever created and deliver its terrible payload onto men who were simply waiting to go home. The ghost in the machine had become all too real. The echoes of the blast faded into the cold desert night, but the questions had just begun to scream. In the chaos of field hospitals and frantic radio calls, another kind of search was underway. It was a hunt not for survivors, but for a reason. The Patriot, the great shield in the sky, had been silent. It had watched the enemy missile arc across the heavens, a fiery messenger of death, and it had done nothing. It had simply missed. But it had not fired. It had not even seen. The ghost had to be found. The first whispers of its presence had come weeks before, not from the sands of Saudi Arabia, but from across the border in Israel. The Israeli Defense Forces, seasoned veterans of missile warfare, had noticed something was wrong. They watched their own Patriot batteries engage incoming Scuds and saw a pattern of near misses, of interceptions that were just slightly off, a few fatal meters shy of their mark. They saw a system that grew less accurate the longer it was running. They sent their data, their charts, their quiet warnings to their American counterparts. A clock, they said. A clock inside the machine seemed to be running fast. A small thing, a tiny thing. But in the sky, where time is measured in microseconds and distance is measured in speed, a tiny thing can become a monster. The American engineers listened. They looked at the lines of code that formed the Patriot's mind. And they found it. Not a monster, but a number. A flaw in the way the system's internal clock measured time. It was a rounding error, infinitesimally small, born from a number that could not be perfectly represented in the machine's language. With every passing hour of operation, this tiny error grew, a grain of sand added to a pile, again and again. After 100 hours of continuous use, the accumulated error was just over 1/3 of a second. An eternity. The system was tracking its targets using a clock that was slowly, imperceptibly lying to it. The sky it saw was no longer the real sky. A solution was crafted. A new piece of code. A patch. A few lines of instruction that would teach the machine to see time correctly again. This fix was not a signal beamed from a satellite, not an instant update sent across the world. In 1991, the fix was a physical thing. It was burned onto floppy disks. It was placed in boxes. It was handed to pilots. It had to travel like a man travels, subject to the friction of the world, to flight schedules and ground transport, and the slow, deliberate pace of military logistics. The patch began its journey. It crossed oceans and continents, a tiny digital cure for a ghost it had taken a war to reveal. And on the 25th of February, as the men of Barracks 143 counted the days until they could go home, that patch arrived in Dhahran. It was signed for. It was logged. It sat in an office, waiting. An update to the software for Alpha Battery was scheduled for the next day, for the 26th. The operators of the Patriot system guarding the barracks had been told to keep their system running. It had been online for over 100 hours. Its internal clock drifting further and further from reality with every tick. The error had grown. The pile of sand was now a dune. The ghost was patient. It waited in the dark for a missile to come, knowing that the window it would use to calculate the interception was no longer in the right place. The cure was on a shelf, less than a mile away, while the disease was in the sky. The next morning, the sun rose on a changed world. It revealed a landscape of violence. Where a building of concrete and steel had offered shelter, there was now only a wound in the earth, a crater, raw and deep, as if the planet itself had been gouged open. The desert sand, which had seen empires rise and fall, was now mixed with the unrecognizable fragments of 1,000 lives. Twisted metal, insulation that looked like scorched snow, and the fine grey dust of pulverized concrete covered everything. It was a place of profound silence, the kind of quiet that follows a sound too big to be remembered. Investigators walked this ground. They moved with a reverence reserved for sacred places and great tragedies. They were not just cataloguing an explosion, they were reading the last testament of the machine. And when they finally pieced it all together, the story was more terrible than any enemy action. They traced the failure from this crater, this hole in the world, all the way back to that single flawed number in a line of code. They saw the path of the incoming Scud. They saw the ghost window created by the Patriot's faulty clock, a searching area hundreds of yards from the missile's actual path. The shield had been looking in the wrong part of the sky because its heart, its clock, was out of time. The 28 soldiers had died, the building had been erased, and this scar had been torn into the land because of a mathematical error smaller than the blink of an eye. The land remembers. The wind that shifts the dunes and whispers over the stones holds the memory of that day. The crater is long since filled, the wreckage hauled away, but the story remains. It is a story about the great bargain we have made with the things we create. We build them to be perfect, to be faster and stronger and more certain than we are. We wrap ourselves in their logic, their cool and calculating embrace, and we trust them with our lives. But we forget that the ghost is always there. It is the echo of our own imperfection, the tiny flaw, the rounding error we coded into the heart of the machine ourselves. It is a reminder that no shield is absolute, and that for all our power, for all our digital certainty, the difference between life and death can still be a number too small to see, arriving just a single day too late.